Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soulful Abundance Festival. I'm your host, Elise Preston, founder of Be More Connected, and today I am so excited to be here with the amazing Jessica Moy. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. And Jessica started off her career as a physical therapist in a traditional clinical setting with a passion for women's health and wellness. But she soon discovered a common missing link for people's embodied health and understanding and utilizing our mind-body connection. And that really inspired her to want to explore her own business that was centered around holistic health and well-being. And in doing so, she then embarked on her own decolonization journey, merging activism, wellness, and entrepreneurship to help other leaders find balance and empowerment in their lanes of impact. And Jessica believes in the new paradigm and that it is here, and that in order to support it, we need to create sustainable and ethical leadership strategies. And she's dedicated to helping women step into their voice to uplift their communities. And so I know I shared that more formal bio, but would love to be able to hear from you in your own words as well about your own journey of healing and some of the things that have really supported you and being able to step into the powerful work that you're doing in the world today.
Yeah, it's always so funny when I hear the more formal version back and I'm like, wow, yeah, like
Yes.
it has been a journey.
Mm.
But I think really in moving into this space, what supported me the most and what influenced me the most was really the power of my own story and the power of having and holding spaces that allowed my story to come through the work that I do. Because really,
Mm.
in movement work, organizations, nonprofits, we really function as fractals or smaller portions of
Mm.
the larger scale impact or endeavor, right? So
Right.
understanding the intersection of our identities and the beauty of where we come from was really a potent expander in my experience and my commitment to being where I am, because the journey of entrepreneurship is non-linear for those that are not
Yes.
familiar. There's a lot of highs and lows, and it really has been my own spiritual awakening in recognizing and holding space for things that seem surface level or problems that you come up with in your business, but really reflect like a deeper wound or a deeper need for healing and attention. So
Sure.
that's kind of been the support that has been really driving this is that understanding of my own experiences and how they intersect, and that this paradigm that I speak of is, again, so much more than just leadership or just entrepreneurship or just activism. Really having wellness be that underlying driver in sustainability and being in this road for the long haul and not just the sprint.
Yes. And I think I was most like drawn and magnetized to you and your work and your brand because of the beautiful way that you speak about having wellness sit at the center of what we do in order to be able to be more sustained in the work that we do, but also in really breaking down and decolonizing so many of the ways in which our world operates that is not human-centered, that is not supportive of us being embodied and feeling that it is safe to be in our bodies and right, be able to access those more intuitive, alive, beautiful places when we're always hustling in go mode.
Right.
And so I think that it's so beautiful and so powerful. So many of the ways that you speak to working at the intersections, right? Like the intersection of wellness and embodiment and leadership and activism. And for folks who maybe aren't familiar yet with you and your work, wondering if you could share a bit more about this lens of embodied leadership and what that means to you.
Yeah, totally. And I get this a lot. And especially nowadays, I do feel like embodiment, that word is really thrown around, like very buzzwordy.
Yeah.
um, but embodiment really to me is understanding. My friend so beautifully put this, and I've kind of carried it around. She's a yoga instructor based out of Colorado, Davidia Turner, and she was the first person that kind of introduced this idea to me and kind of put it in a cohesive framework of this idea of intuition and instinct, and how I've kind of created it to really relate to that embodiment piece is this idea of instinct, right? Our body, from a physical and primal perspective, has these responses that keep us safe, right? Protected. But in our current world, we often have those responses become triggered in events or situations that are not necessarily life-threatening, but feel threatening.
Sure.
And so when we look at intuition, I look at it as that like softer, more quieter voice, that more reassuring voice that gets overpowered by the voice of our instinct. Right. And so when I look at embodied leadership, I look at relationship building, communication, decision making that comes from a more intuitive place and less of an instinctual place. And so, for example, you maybe are in a situation where you're making a really tough decision for your company. And if you look at it from an embodied place, you're looking at it from, okay, intuitively, what is going to be the most impactful, the most sustainable for not just me and my company, but for the community, right? Because intuitively, we think of it as a more aligned or higher awareness of collective well-being, right? But if we're looking at it instinctually, maybe your response is like, how do I keep my business going? Like, how do I prevent, XYZ catastrophe? It's more out of like a fear-based survival perspective. Sure. So when I look at embodied leadership and what I share, it essentially boils down to how in tune are you with those bodily responses that you can associate with past patterns of instinctual reactivity, right? Instinctual actions that keep us safe, but maybe aren't in the best benefit of us and our growth and moving forward. And again, that collective well-being. So that to me really is what embodied leadership is. It boils down to that instinct and that awareness of the mind-body connection, because then you can really move from a place of, okay, let me take a step back. Let me see how my body's responding to this. What parts of this decision-making process or relationship or whatever is triggering to me, triggering old wounds. That's what embodied leadership really encompasses in the work that I do and what I hope to spread and make more of the norm, I guess you could say.
Yes. And how incredibly powerful will it be when it is the norm, when it is customary for individuals, but also businesses and organizations to ask themselves more of those collective questions when decision making, when communicating, not only just focusing on how does this affect me or how does this affect my bottom line, but how does this impact the community as a whole? How does this or doesn't this serve our collective well-being?
Yeah.
So powerful. And I know in our pre-interview conversation, we also had a chance to chat a bit about sustainable wellness and equitable business. And I know that those are things that you're currently exploring in your life and in your work. And was just wondering if we could, I know this probably is like tied into what we were just speaking about in terms of embodied leadership, but wondering if you could expand upon that in this conversation here.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because I view most things as like circular or a cycle.
Mm,
So when I was creating my business model and I had previous business coaches, they're like, what's your product suite? Or like, what are you offering? And it's often this like tiered model, right? For me, it is more of this cycle of sustainable wellness, embodied
mm,
leadership, and equitable business. And as you kind of address one, you're addressing the other, and it becomes easier to build out whatever you're doing, whether that be a business or in your 9 to 5 or whatever. So
love it.
to me, equitable business and sustainable wellness, again, contribute to that collective well-being. So when I think of sustainable wellness, I think of not like the goopified woo-woo, and even the term woo-woo is like kind of problematic, right?
Yeah.
But I think of like what will keep you well for the long haul, that you are committed to, that you can make a non-negotiable, that fits your practice. I think
Mm,
in the wellness field, it's like you see all these taglines again of meditate for 5 minutes a day and automatically increase your productivity. Well, what if you're a mom, maybe a single mom working 3 jobs, and maybe you don't have 5 minutes? And some
yeah.
people will say, okay, well, that means that they're not prioritizing their time or what have you. And it creates this like shame culture around wellness,
Mm,
which is the exact antithesis of what wellness was created for ancestrally, right?
right.
So my whole thing about sustainable wellness is what can you make in your daily life that supports your well-being, that you feel connected to? And
Mm,
maybe that's not meditation, maybe that's not a movement practice. Maybe that's just like washing dishes and listening to Frank Sinatra. Like, I don't know, something that
sure.
keeps you well and in your joy. And then
Yes.
that ties into the equitable business piece of, okay, so maybe you are helping somebody create that wellness. How are you addressing it? Is the thing
Mm,
that you're creating accessible to them? Or does it again create more culture of guilt and shame that they can't access what you're providing? And that's
mm,
kind of in the wellness service piece of business, but it goes for a lot of things, like the more well we are in ourselves and the more we recognize that the wellness of ourselves is intertwined with the community and the collective, the easier the equitable business piece becomes, because it becomes less performative. It becomes less about implementing a DE&I statement and maybe even an anti-racism policy. It becomes, okay, I'm not well because my community is not well. So how do I make a practice that is equitable and then thus contributes to our wellness? Um, and I think that's that missing link that people get tripped up about when they think about equity and anti-racism and
mm,
activism. They make it so big that it has to be grandiose or this big gesture, when really
right.
it's like, how are you addressing your wellness in your body? How are you
Mm,
addressing the wellness of your relationships in your inner circle? And then that bleeds into, again, this idea of the microcosm becoming the macrocosm.
yes.
And my work is really also inspired by this idea of emergent strategy, which we kind of spoke about by Adrienne Marie Brown.
Yes.
And this idea, again, like we are fractal human beings, we're fractal
Mm,
creatures. We operate at a small scale, and that expands outwards. So the
right.
more sustainable our wellness is, the easier that can bleed out into our business, our leadership, and all of that kind of thing. So again, it always, for me, in my like sometimes like airy, esoteric brain, it is this cycle. And how can we
Yes.
address the parts of the cycle that are most accessible, so we don't have to feel like we have to
Mhm.
do everything at once,
Right.
and then grow from there. And that's really what it
Yes.
means to me, for me, and like what I do.
Yes. Oh, I love this so much. And I really appreciate the the thread that you were bringing through about um, the ways in which oftentimes organizations make these large, like grandiose gestures
Mm-hmm.
around equity or diversity and
Mm-hmm.
inclusion or activism, and that I just in my own personal experience have worked with a couple of different nonprofit organizations and have seen how that's been rolled out and
Mm-hmm.
felt in my body or and just felt in my experience with the organization how disconnected that was from the just true essence of what it means to embody leadership or to have
Mm-hmm.
a vision that is centered around wellness, sustainability, equity, and leadership. And that in order for us to be able to do this work in a way that is in integrity and connected to our values and connected to being able to do this work in a way that's not performative, it does really start with each and every one of us operating from more of that just heart centered, like body informed way. And
Mm-hmm.
starting, I love like how you're breaking it down and just making it so accessible, like starting with what is the most sustainable way for us to be able to like within ourselves, within the way that we're communicating, within the way that we're making decisions, within the way that we're just interacting relationally with each other, what is keeping us well, what is amplifying our joy, and what is in alignment with our values, and how do we just move with that
Yeah.
um, and not feel so compelled to create like statements or initiatives
Right.
or policies for this just for the sake of them that
Totally.
aren't going to be integrated or embodied in a real way, because at that point it's just an exercise, like it's just
Mm-hmm.
for show, and that doesn't serve anyone, that doesn't further and support our collective well-being.
Right. Yeah. It's a ripple effect, like it really stems from us, and then recognizing too with these policies and statements, like what is the follow through? What is the
Right.
follow up? Are they needed? They're often like created and then there's no reflection of, are they working? It's like, oh, well, we
Sure.
have this, we can check a box. Now we're good. And that's such a disembodied and like dissociated way of addressing it, when it really
Right.
doesn't have to be that hard. I think people make it
Right.
more complicated than it has to be.
Yes. And I think, yeah, even just inviting this conversation, um, I think will allow people to get curious about how we can allow this to be more simple and be more
Mm-hmm.
embodied, um, which is so important.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I'd love to be able to hear a bit about the role that connection and community play in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I do want to preface this. I am not a DE&I, facilitator. I'm not an anti-racism coach or educator, right? Like, I think a lot of times people put activism in this like lane where you are, if you talk about it, you're like an activist or whatever.
Mm,
And I think, that even definition of activist and activism is very like confined. So in what I
yeah.
do, I am educating myself while opening the space to
Mm,
educate others. But then that bottom line of connect with others.
Yes.
And I think for me, the whole premise around why I started building what I'm building is because we need just more spaces to have open dialogues and connect with each other without feeling like, oh, I'm going to jump on this course and educate myself now. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Like, where are the spaces where you can use that education and integrate it into your actual life? And that's what I feel is what I'm doing, right? Like, I'm sharing information, but really what I want is this dialogue. Because I think the more that we learn about each other and recognize what it means to have liberated relationships, resilient relationships, and connect in a really authentic and honest, but compassionate way, that's what sparks productive dialogue, right? So connection and community for me really are at the foundation of how I mentor and teach and create spaces, because it's less about what is the person going to leave with, what is the knowledge that they're going to leave with. We have a lot of really smart people in this world, like, and there's a lot of resources out there already. So I'm not trying to recreate the wheel here. I'm just trying to be more of the mindset of when they leave a space that I've curated, how do they feel afterwards? What do they feel now empowered to do? And what discomfort were they able to sit with and grow in? And that's the connection that I want to cultivate, but the only way I've been able to do that is, again, do it myself, right? How can I hold space if I don't recognize like how everyone's going to feel when they're in that space and having the uncomfortable conversations? And so one of the very first workshops that I ever held that was more activism and embodied, like connect related, was this idea of lived language and recognizing you don't have to know all of the right words and you don't have to be on the forefront of what the newest, most appropriate term for XYZ demographic is. It's more about being open to the dialogue and being able to hold yourself in accountability to take feedback and change. Because we're going to be changing for years to come. So if somebody, you know, for example, like this term BIPOC even, that's a term that I've been using. And now there's a little bit more back and forth of like, is this the right term to use? Because we're putting, you know, people of color into one conglomerate, right?
Yeah.
But then I have to kind of digest and see how that word sits with me, see what works with my community, see how they feel about it. And my rule of thumb is if it's harmful for even a few people and it's easy to change, why not just change it?
Right.
Versus, you know, maybe if it's harmful to a few people, but it's not as easy to change, you really have to like go into that gray area and do what's best for you and make the most educated decision. And that to me is lived language, because you're taking into consideration other people, you're integrating it with your own experience. And then if you choose to continue whatever action, behavior, word, term, whatever it is, at least you have education that you can explain to someone why you use it, and not again as a defense, but as a dialogue, because the dialogue means that you're open to what they have to say and integrating it again into your own experience. And that to me is what connection is. And I feel like that is kind of, you know, everyone kind of goes about it in a different way, but that's how it has worked for me and my community and the people that I've connected with. And again, open to changing that, right? It's a very fluid thing. So that to me has been the most helpful in terms of connecting to people with all different backgrounds, all different viewpoints,
Yeah.
and still coming out feeling like understanding was had, even though bodily wise, it does feel uncomfortable, right? And you're not going to agree with everyone.
Right.
And then that goes back into the sustainable wellness of, okay, what wellness practices do I need to tap into to soothe myself based on that conversation so that I can continue to connect with people in a productive and fruitful way?
Yes. Ooh, yes. There was so much here that you shared around connection that feels so alive and so powerful. And I've actually never been introduced to that phrase of lived language before, and really appreciate that. That it really centers coming at dialogue and coming at communication, not from that seat of being an expert or knowing it all or having to be attached to a particular framework or lens or modality, but we're just all here to communicate and take in information and give each other feedback and be open to that new information changing us or introducing something that we may not have been aware of before.
Yeah.
And I think this is just such important framing for this time because we are living in an era where there is so much polarity and so much divisiveness that we're seeing across so many different spheres and sectors of life. And so in what ways can we start to introduce new ways of communicating and relating to each other that are actually generative, that are actually supportive? And I really appreciated those questions that you incorporated, as well as kind of the guiding questions that you like to use when interacting with folks or bringing people together. What do they feel empowered to do after leaving, and what discomfort did they have the opportunity to create space for, to sit with and grow through? And I think, that level of questioning is something that allows for all of our interactions to be so transformational versus passive, because sometimes we do go to workshops or attend an online webinar and we're there and we do the thing, but it's like, so what? Like, what's happening now? So I really appreciate just that depth and that richness that you're welcoming in and centering in the experiences that you're creating.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I'd love to hear a bit about some of your current growth edges in your life and in your spiritual practice.
Yeah, it was actually so funny. Before you even asked the question, I wanted to be like, I also don't have it all figured out. Like, I'm still, that's, I think, the beauty of that the whole decolonization model of power dynamics, right? And so when I create a space, I'm not creating the space so that I am like the higher up power and everyone else is kind of like this that power over dynamic. I'm entering the space with you as you. We are in a similar exchange. And so it just as like a preface, like that's kind of also the inspiration in this too, is like, I'm also learning. So especially coming to the growth edges of this, right? It's been interesting in decolonizing my own practices, my own mindset. A little bit of a background about me: I'm Asian American. My dad is Chinese. My mom is Filipino, but I grew up in America. And so I think the growth edges for me have really been similar to what I said in the beginning of how my business has become this like spiritual awakening. things and blocks and obstacles that I've come across when delving deeper have always shone a light on parts of myself that I have either shielded from, past experiences, or patterns that again have come from that instinctual survival mode that are not beneficial to me. And so I think the growth edges really have come from having to address personal growth and personal healing in order to move forward in my business, in how I lead, in how I show up in the world, in my boundaries and relationships that I have with people. I think that has been the biggest growth edge, because I thought that I wanted to be a physical therapist pretty much since the time I was like 15.
Wow.
And so I had been on a linear trajectory for pretty much a decade at that point when I finished PT school, right?
Right.
And so moving from this linear model of like every obstacle has a said path to solution that is not within myself, it's like external, right? You take the test, or you study more, or you do this or whatever. That was honestly easy. I won't say that PT school, grad school is easy, but like what you needed to do to quote unquote succeed in that literal linear model was very like apparent. But this growth edge in entrepreneurship and leadership and being able to make my own decisions was honestly way harder, because I had to be like, okay, who am I making these decisions for? Who am I modeling? What am I modeling success after? And coming up time and time again with what I had viewed as failures or me not being good enough, and recognizing, okay, how am I gaslighting myself? How am I downplaying my light and my voice and my potential to fit a box that somebody else created for me? And then recognizing that and being able to hold space for the grief or sometimes the rage and like whatever emotions came up, that for me was the biggest growth edge and the largest obstacle by far that I've ever had to encounter. Because in entrepreneurship, honestly, the numbers, the success, the whatever, that comes easy when, again, you've been able to embody and hold space for yourself.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't believe me. You're like, people I work with, they're like, why are we talking about emotional intelligence and mindset work? I just want to create like the things that are going to bring me success. And I'm like, honey, this is your success.
That's how we get there.
That's how we get there, So I had, again, to traverse that though on my own before I was again able to even speak about it, whether it was with someone else or with a client or a mentee, so
yes.
Yeah, that growth edge, it is real.
So real. And I really appreciate the way that you are continuing to articulate this message, that in order for you to be able to teach, offer, or share, that you yourself first have gone through the depths of exploring that in your own personal experience, found the ways to heal and move and grow through it, and then are able to share that wisdom and medicine with others. And that, I feel, is such a powerful reminder for all of us, because sometimes I think it can be really easy when things are feeling really hard or stressful or overwhelming for us to think that we're failing or we did something wrong. And if we can kind of zoom out and take more of that bird's eye view and really start to feel into the truth that everything that we are learning from, growing from, like experiencing, it is providing us with some kind of lesson or offering that we can then share, that can be supportive to others. And it can be added into our own tool belt, our own skill set, expanding our own capacity for what it is that we do in our work in the world.
Yeah.
And I really love the way that you were speaking about that the more that we embody and hold space for ourselves, right? That's actually what allows us to be more abundant as entrepreneurs, to connect in more with the things that we desire. And so I'd also love to hear about what you've been learning about abundance through your own experience with entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great like tie-in of everything. Like, what is abundance, right? What does that mean? And there's a whole, topic that we could go down a rabbit hole with about manifestation, right?
Sure.
And like abundance manifesting, and what does that mean? And is it vision boarding? Is it like, creating a 6-figure business? Like, what is it? And I truly think that abundance comes from this understanding that the abundance you experience comes from collective well-being. And it comes from the acknowledgement of land and earth and what you are afforded in this present moment that allows you to do the next thing. Right? So I think this more trendy term of abundance disregards our experience, our human experience, and disregards privilege that we have, right? Like where we come from, what our background is, what we have been given, and people kind of disregard that. So for me, the abundance is, what have I been given up until this point and been afforded in this lifetime that I can now use to create collective well-being? And this honestly goes over financial abundance and monetary abundance, because yes, that is part of it, but that is just like one small piece. And so how can you be a better steward of what you already have, and whatever that means to you, right? Like financially maybe, or relationship wise, and how can you use that, or use that privilege to continue the cycle? And so I think recognizing, being a steward of what you already have, the gratitude of what you're afforded in this present moment, and then what you want to create that not just serves others. I think this idea of service sometimes can get a little bit martyr-ish. That's a word. I'm more talking about service in terms of you, your family, your circle, your relationships, but then also collectively. And that's what abundance is for me, is that awareness that it's so much bigger than you and so much more than the money in your bank account. Like, that's important, don't get me wrong, right? Like, I'm not negating that. But when you can start to see bigger picture, it becomes less of like a struggle to call in, because the exchange again feels more equitable and unanimous. And so that to me is like abundance, and recognizing also your past and your future, like the abundance your ancestors provided for you, and the abundance that you're affording the next generation, right? Like, that's abundance. And that's where the medicine will be in again, that cycle, creating equitable business, creating embodied leadership, creating sustainable wellness. What is it for? Again, collective well-being, collective abundance, that is reciprocal and feels mutually beneficial in this arena of us being human and the duality. I love this word duality because it's less polarity. It's like both and, both
Yes.
and. You can be
Yes.
abundant in yourself and in your whatever you do, and also provide abundance for the collective without feeling like you're losing anything, because you're not. So that is like abundance. And again, like this embodied sense of me, like I feel that, like I get like, it's like little mini microscopic lightnings in my body.
Ooh.
Like that's what I feel. Talk about that
Yes.
because it's so
Mm.
important for us to recognize, again, that duality of manifesting
Yep.
and creating the thing, but also recognizing that we're doing the thing in human form. And that also
Mm.
comes with things out of our control, systemic things out of our control, but also a lot of
Yes.
things in our control too.
Yes. Ooh. And I am just like feeling so excited about the way that you're describing abundance. And it does feel like it is so multidimensional and encompasses this both and this duality that you're speaking of, that I think is sometimes lost in some of our more mainstream conversations about abundance. And so I really love this definition that you shared. And I don't know if I captured it perfectly, but like the essence of what you were sharing about abundance coming from collective well-being, and that us being able to take what we've been given in this lifetime and then allowing that to meaningfully contribute to what we're experiencing on a collective level,
Yeah.
just feels so different, right? Than some of the messages that we're receiving about abundance. And it welcomes in and invites that recognition of our deep interconnectedness, of our ability and capacity to both tend to ourselves and tend to the collective, and that those things are not at odds with each other at all, but that they are reciprocal and support each other, in this beautiful recognition that you've been describing. And I would love to be able to just have an opportunity for you to share any closing words that you'd like to share with our audience, whether it's related to these aspects around abundance or embodied leadership, and how our audience members can carry something forward, and be stewards of what they already have, within themselves and within their communities.
Yeah. I think the thing, I like to keep things simple and easy. And for my community, I always sign my emails off with you in the small but mighty steps.
Mm.
And I truly believe that it's the key. It's the small but mighty steps, right? Every step that you
Yes.
take, whether you feel it's forwards or backwards, is a step in a direction that is guiding you somewhere.
Mm.
As long as you are continuing to check in and recognize what your intention is, and not just the intention, but the impact of your intention, because that matters too. So if everyone, listens to like these last 5 minutes, it's like TLDR, too much, not enough time, whatever. It's just like, take a step in a direction, reach out to a person, right? Hold a conversation, do the thing that you've been putting off because you've been afraid of what will happen. And that can look like, let's say you want to start a YouTube account. That can look like literally just registering an account, like these little things, they add up over time. We've just been trained to not appreciate the smaller steps because we have this instant gratification model that just doesn't exist. Like, it's not possible for what we're trying to build here. So
yes,
if you can do anything, do it small, be intentional, and just
Mm.
trust yourself and really allow that intuition to guide you to people that also allow and support you in trusting yourself too.
Yes. Do it small, be intentional, and trust yourself. I love that as a concluding message. And so I have just had such an amazing experience being able to connect with you. It's been such a joy and a pleasure to receive your medicine and just drink in all the wisdom that you've been sharing. And so I know that our audience is also going to be so excited about learning ways that they can stay connected with you. And so if you could share that now, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at embodied_impact. And I also just created a digital library. So it'll have resources from free to paid that are downloadable, like challenges that are self-reflection prompts in the arena of embodiment and activism. So that is on my website and also in my Instagram bio. And then coming up, I'm also creating a collective. So it will be a collective for us to give care, get care, and pull up together with a ton of really amazing guest mentors, speakers, wellness practitioners, because as I've said, I think it takes a village, right? And we're about the collective co-creation of the change we want to see. So if you subscribe to my newsletter, that will be consistently or up for you guys to access in June. So those are all the ways. But I'm a DM away, an email away. I love conversation and connecting with people. So
Yes.
nothing is too big or too small in my world.
Yes. Well, thank you again so much for being here. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I look forward to connecting with you throughout the remainder of the summit. Be well,
Yay.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.